The first hint that something was off didn't come with a crash or a scream, it came in the form of an overloaded mailbox. I had just pulled into my grandparents' old driveway for my usual weekend check-in when my eyes fell on the metal box, practically sagging under a mountain of envelopes. A few were sticking out like they were trying to flee. At first, I assumed it was just junk mail. Then I noticed the return address, Pine Valley, HOA, and the recipient names, Harold and Margaret Chen, my grandparents, who had been gone for 3 years. I carried the heap inside and spread the envelopes across the kitchen table. 37 in total. All violations. All absurd. Grass too long by half an inch. Faded paint on a barely visible back fence. The shutters were the wrong shade of beige. It would have been comical if it weren't terrifying. Across from me sat my lawyer, James, who had agreed to come after I explained the growing avalanche of letters. He picked one up, scanned it, then another. His eyebrows shot up in disbelief, and then dropped into a frown. He pulled out his phone and began snapping photos. When I asked what he was thinking, he muttered something about potential federal violations. I had inherited the house 6 months earlier after the estate finally cleared probate. My plan was simple: hold onto it until I could afford the renovations it desperately needed. The place was old, sure, faded paint, a yard that required care, but it was far from abandoned. I came by weekly, kept the lights on, the water running, ensured the structure stayed solid. What I hadn't expected was to become a target of Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, who apparently believed her title granted her authority to micromanage and intimidate every homeowner in the neighborhood. The first wave of fines landed on a Tuesday morning. I nearly tossed them, assuming they were marketing gimmicks, until I saw the certified mail stickers. I opened the first envelope, then the second. By the third, my jaw was on the floor. $150 fines for trivial offenses, a patch of dandelions, a loose shutter hinge, all addressed to Harold and Margaret Chen. I called the HOA office immediately. A woman answered, her voice sharp and clipped. I explained that my grandparents had passed, and that I now owned the property. She cut me off. Ignorance of HOA rules is not an excuse, she said flatly. Later, I learned it had been Karen herself taking the call. I tried reasoning with her. I offered documentation, death certificates, court paperwork, anything to prove ownership. She dismissed me as if I were some telemarketer. Fines must be paid within 30 days, she said, and hung up. Still, I did what any rational person would do. I sent copies of everything: death certificates, probate paperwork, a polite cover letter. I even requested they update their records and included my contact information. 2 weeks later, another stack arrived, this time with late fees tacked on and a new letter, signed by Karen Mitchell herself, accusing me of using the deaths of my grandparents as an excuse to avoid responsibility. She literally wrote quote unquote in reference to their passing. The fine spread like wildfire, shrubs slightly above regulation height. Unauthorized bird activity because the cardinal in the oak tree wasn't on some approved wildlife list. Paint colors that hadn't changed in 20 years. By the end of month 3, the total bill had ballooned past $8,000. Karen's tone had shifted too from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. One note suggested I should consider selling the property to someone who respects community standards, and then came the registered letter. Not another fine, this was a notice of intent to foreclose. They were threatening to take the house, the one that had been in my family for 40 years. Over what? Dead homeowners. I couldn't sleep that night. I scoured every resource I could find on HOA regulations. Around 3 a.m., I stumbled across an article about the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. It clearly stated that attempting to collect debts from deceased persons was illegal. That was it. That was the thread I needed to pull. I spent the following day calling law offices until I found James Morrison, a consumer rights attorney who specialized in FSPA violations. I explained the entire situation, and there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Say that again," he asked. Slower this time. When I finished, I could hear the excitement building in his voice. He told me that in his 20 years of practice, he had never seen such a blatant case. We met that afternoon. I brought the entire stack of letters with me. James laid them out like evidence at a crime scene, inspecting each one meticulously. By the time we finished, he had already outlined a full strategy, not just a lawsuit, but formal complaints to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FTC, and the State Attorney General's office. He explained that each letter represented a separate violation, potentially costing the HOA $1,000 apiece. And that didn't even account for punitive damages. The lawsuit was served on a Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of the HOA's monthly board meeting. According to my neighbor Tom, who was present, Karen's face went pale as she read the complaint. Chaos erupted. Board members frantically pulled out phones, Googling FSPA, federal penalties, and criminal implications. One whispered something about potential criminal charges. Another broke into tears. Less than 24 hours later, I received a call from the HOA's attorney, who sounded like he was on the verge of a panic attack. He offered to erase all fines if I would withdraw the complaints. James laughed and hung up. The next day, they were offering settlements. By Monday, they were begging. The CFPB had opened a formal investigation. Federal investigators began scheduling interviews. Local news picked up the story, with segments titled "The HOA That Tried to Find the Dead." Then came the final settlement meeting. We sat in a downtown conference room, Karen Mitchell at the far end of the table. The HOA's attorney read the terms: all fines rescinded, a written public apology to be published in the local paper, and $45,000 in damages. But the most devastating part wasn't the money, it was the 5-year federal consent decree. The HOA would now be monitored for every collection activity, and any future violation would carry criminal consequences. As Karen signed, her hands trembled. The lead investigator informed her that, while no criminal charges were being filed at that moment, she was now listed in a federal database of FSPA violators. Her real estate license, the one she had used to bully neighbors under the guise of property values, was under review. Their insurance carrier dropped them immediately. Then came the real blow. The IRS announced an audit of the HOA's books going back 7 years. Karen made a sound like a balloon deflating, but the image I'll never forget is her looking up at me, tears streaming, asking how I could do this to her. I smiled. "I'm just following the rules," I said. "Ignorance of federal law is no excuse." The HOA board was officially dissolved. Karen was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. She wailed as security escorted her out. Her reign, built on intimidation and petty fines, had been shattered by the very laws she weaponized against others. In the following weeks, James kept me updated. The State Real Estate Commission didn't just review Karen's license, they revoked it. Then came the domino effect. The IRS audit revealed she had embezzled over $200,000 from HOA funds, disguised as beautification projects. She spent association money on vacations, handbags, even her daughter's wedding. What had started as a civil case snowballed into a criminal one. The news ran special segments: death and fines, the HOA scandal that shook Pine Valley. Dozens of residents came forward. A veteran fined for flying an American flag. A mother threatened over her child's chalk drawings. Every account painted the same picture: Karen Mitchell drunk on power. Federal charges were filed: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each fine sent to my deceased grandparents became a separate count of mail fraud, each carrying up to 20 years in prison. With 37 counts plus embezzlement, Karen faced a lifetime behind bars. I sat through every day of her trial. When the guilty verdict was read, Karen collapsed in her chair. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, full restitution, and $500,000 in punitive damages. As bailiffs cuffed her, she screamed that she was only trying to maintain property values. And that was it. Karen Mitchell. Her HOA kingdom crumbled not with the revolution, but with the federal case number. All because she tried to target the dead and met someone unwilling to back down. If you think the story was wild, just wait. There's plenty more where that came from. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next tale of petty power, legal revenge, and poetic justice. Because in a world full of Karen, you'll want a front row seat.